My husband found an old letter hidden in my closet. When he opened it, his hands started shaking. It was a DNA test from years ago, and it proved our son wasn't his. When I walked in, he just looked at me and said, "How long were you going to keep this secret?" I never imagined that a single piece of paper could unravel the life we built over 2 decades. But that's exactly what happened when my husband, Mark, found that old letter hidden in the back of our closet. It was a DNA test from years ago, proof that our son, Ethan, wasn't biologically his. When I walked in and saw him holding that letter, his hands trembling, he looked at me and asked, "How long were you going to keep this secret?" We met in college in Chicago, both of us full of dreams and ambition. Our love blossomed quickly, and we married soon after graduation. Ethan was born a year later, and Mark was overjoyed. He was the kind of father who attended every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, and never missed a bedtime story. Our life seemed perfect from the outside, but there was a time, early in our marriage, when things weren't so perfect. Mark was working long hours, and I felt lonely and neglected. In a moment of weakness, I had a brief affair. When I discovered I was pregnant, I convinced myself that the timing aligned with Mark's schedule, and I pushed the affair out of my mind. I never told him. Years later, guilt consumed me, and I took a secret DNA test. The results confirmed my worst fears. Ethan wasn't Mark's biological son. I couldn't bring myself to tell him. I hid the letter in a box of old keepsakes, hoping it would never see the light of day. Now, standing in our bedroom, the truth laid bare. I saw the betrayal in Mark's eyes. He didn't yell or accuse. He simply asked, "How long?" I tried to explain, to apologize, but the damage was done. He packed a bag and left that night. Ethan, now a teenager, was devastated. He couldn't understand why his father left. I had to tell him the truth, and it broke his heart. Mark eventually returned, not to reconcile with me, but to be there for Ethan. He said, "He's still my son, no matter what." Our marriage didn't survive, but Mark and Ethan's bond remained strong. I live with the consequences of my actions every day, knowing that a moment of weakness led to a lifetime of regret. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that secrets have a way of coming to light, and the truth, no matter how painful, must be faced. After Mark left that night, something in the house changed. The air felt heavier, like guilt had settled into the walls. Ethan barely spoke to me for days. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. He locked himself in his room, only coming out to eat in silence, then retreating again. I wanted to give him space, but every second of that silence cut deeper than any shouting ever could. Mark started coming by on weekends. At first, he'd just take Ethan out for lunch or to the park. Then he began helping with school projects, driving him to practice, sitting in on therapy sessions I'd arranged. It hurt to see them together, but it also gave me peace knowing he hadn't abandoned our son completely. Then one day, Ethan came downstairs holding his phone and said, "Mom, who is Daniel Mercer?" I froze. Daniel Mercer was the man I had the affair with. We hadn't spoken in almost 15 years. I thought I'd scrubbed every trace of him from my life. Apparently not. Ethan said he found some emails on an old laptop. Emails I thought I deleted years ago. He read one where Daniel said he wished he could have been part of Ethan's life. I sat down, heart pounding, and told him the truth. Daniel was his biological father. Ethan didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at me and said, "So my whole life is a lie?" Later that night, I got a call from Mark. He was furious. "You lied to him again. Even now, you couldn't tell him the whole truth." He had to find out from a computer. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say that I was protecting Ethan, that I didn't want to hurt anyone. But all I could say was, "I'm sorry." Because that was the truth. I was sorry. More than he could ever know. A few days later, Ethan asked if he could meet Daniel. That hit me like a punch in the stomach. I said no at first. I told him it was complicated, that we didn't know what kind of person Daniel had become. But Ethan was relentless. He said he needed to know where he came from. I couldn't stop him, and deep down, I knew I didn't have the right to. So I reached out. I found Daniel's number in an old notebook hidden in a storage bin. When I called, he picked up on the second ring. Hello, Daniel, it's me, Claire. There was a long pause. Then, I always wondered if I'd hear from you again. I told him everything. About the DNA test, about Ethan, about Mark. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was shaken. He said he wanted to meet Ethan too, but only if Ethan truly wanted that. They met at a small diner off the highway, halfway between our town and where Daniel lived now in Madison, Wisconsin. Ethan insisted on going alone, but Mark followed him, parked outside, just in case. Later, Ethan said Daniel seemed nervous, but kind. He told Ethan stories about his family, about how he always wondered if he had a son out there. He even showed him pictures of his other kids, Ethan's half-siblings. Ethan came home confused. He wasn't angry, just lost. He said he didn't know where he belonged anymore. Meanwhile, I was unraveling in ways I didn't expect. At work, I couldn't focus. I was making mistakes. I got written up twice for things I normally wouldn't even think about. I couldn't sleep without waking up in a cold sweat. I was terrified of losing Ethan, and I already felt like I lost Mark. Then something happened that flipped everything again. A few weeks after the meeting, Ethan stopped coming home on time. He said he was studying at friends' houses, but I found out he'd been spending nights at Daniel's place. I confronted him. You live here, Ethan. This is your home. He looked at me, dead in the eye, and said, no. It's just the place you lied to me for 16 years. That broke me. I went to Mark's house, the one he moved into after we split. I stood on the porch in the rain, shivering, mascara running down my face. When he opened the door, I just said, please help me. I don't know how to fix this. He didn't say anything. He let me inside, made me tea, and sat with me in silence. That night, we didn't talk about the affair or the DNA test. We just talked about Ethan. About how to be there for him. How not to lose him completely. Mark told me something I didn't expect. He said, I still love him like he's mine. But you. I don't know if I can forgive you. It hurt. But it was fair. The next week, Daniel called me. He said something strange. Ethan had been asking him questions, not just about the past, but about money. About college funds. About support. Daniel was getting uncomfortable. He said Ethan was asking about legal rights. He was afraid Ethan might want to legally change his last name. I didn't know what to say. Everything felt like it was spiraling. Then came the legal letter. Mark was filing for shared custody. Not of Ethan, but of future decisions regarding his well-being, even though he wasn't Ethan's biological father. It was a complicated, messy case, and it made headlines in our town. People started whispering. Friends stopped calling. Some coworkers avoided me altogether. I became the woman who cheated, the liar, the villain. But I wasn't trying to be any of those things. I was just trying to hold together the pieces of a life I'd destroyed with one bad decision and years of silence. One night, Ethan came home late again. I was waiting in the dark. When he walked in, I asked him, "Do you hate me?" He didn't answer right away. He took off his jacket, sat down on the couch, and said, "I don't know. I'm trying not to." Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think about telling me? Like, ever?" I nodded. 100 times. I was just too scared. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he whispered, "You should have been scared of losing me, not of the truth." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake thinking about what comes next. And honestly, I still don't know. Everything I thought was solid, my marriage, my family, even my identity as a mother, is now fragile, cracked at the foundation. And every step forward feels like walking on ice. But I'm still here. And so are they. 2 weeks after the legal notice, something unexpected happened that flipped the whole situation again. Daniel stopped answering Ethan's texts. At first, I thought maybe he was overwhelmed or regretting stepping into a life that was already falling apart. But when Ethan called him one night and the number was disconnected, we both panicked. I tried calling too. Nothing. I emailed. No reply. Eventually, Ethan tracked down one of Daniel's coworkers through Facebook. He found out Daniel had packed up and left town. No goodbyes, no warning, just gone. Moved out of his apartment in Madison. Quit his job. No forwarding address. Ethan lost it. He started yelling, throwing things, crying in a way I hadn't seen since he was a little boy. Everyone lies to me. Everyone leaves, he screamed. I tried to hold him. He pushed me away. And then he said something that crushed whatever part of me was still holding it together. I should have never wanted to meet him. I should have just stayed Mark's son. He didn't mean it as forgiveness. It was grief. Confusion. That strange loss of someone you just met, but expected to be there forever. Daniel wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was a ghost now. And that ghost haunted every corner of our home. Things got quiet after that. Uncomfortably quiet. Ethan stopped going to school. I was getting calls from the principal, from his teachers. He wouldn't respond to any of them. He wouldn't talk to Mark either. He just shut down. Mark started coming around more often. Sometimes just to sit with Ethan in silence. Other times, he'd bring over his old guitar and play softly while Ethan laid on the couch staring at the ceiling. They had a bond that no DNA test could erase. And maybe that's what made what came next so strange. One night, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and froze. It was Daniel. He looked tired, gaunt, like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was longer, messy, and he had a backpack slung over one shoulder. His eyes were bloodshot. But he was there. I need to talk to Ethan, he said. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. You left. You broke his heart. He nodded, looking down. I know. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I found out something. Something that scared me. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, medical records. He had been diagnosed with a genetic neurological disorder. It was rare, degenerative, and incurable. He hadn't told Ethan because he didn't want to burden him. But when he started getting symptoms, headaches, tremors, he panicked. He left to get treatment, to figure things out, but it was too much. I didn't want to be another broken father figure, he said, tears in his eyes. I was stunned. I didn't know whether to let him inside or slam the door in his face. I decided to tell Mark first. He came over the next morning, read through the documents, and sat quietly on the porch with Daniel for over an hour. Later, Mark came inside and said, "Let him see Ethan. He needs to know." I told Ethan everything. He didn't say much, but he agreed to meet Daniel again. The second meeting wasn't like the first. It was quiet, slower. Daniel didn't talk like a man trying to make up for lost time. He talked like someone saying goodbye before it was too late. He promised he'd stay in touch this time. That he'd try, even if he couldn't be a father in the way Ethan wanted. In the weeks that followed, things started to shift again. Not in some magical, everything's better now way, but in small steps. Ethan went back to school. He and Mark started working on a car together. They didn't call it repairing their relationship, but it was piece by piece, bolt by bolt. And then another twist came. I was cleaning out the garage when I found a small locked box tucked behind a row of old paint cans. I didn't recognize it. When I finally got it open, what I found made my stomach twist. Inside were a dozen letters. All from Daniel. Dated years ago. All addressed to me. They'd never been opened. And they weren't in my handwriting. They were in Mark's. At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken. But the handwriting was his. I confronted him, showed him the letters. He looked at them, then looked away. I found them in the mail years ago, he said. After Ethan was born, I saw the return address. I opened the first one and I just knew. You knew. I whispered. All this time, I didn't want to know. So I buried it. I told myself maybe you got pregnant right after. Maybe it was still mine. But then the doubts grew. And I hated myself for having them. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I loved you. And I loved Ethan. And I thought, maybe pretending was better than the truth. He didn't look proud. He looked exhausted. He told me he'd kept those letters in case one day I confessed. He wanted to have the truth in his own way. He didn't want to use them against me. He never even read past the first few. But knowing that he'd held on to that secret, the same way I had, shattered the image I had of our marriage. We were both liars. Just different kinds. Now everything is in this weird state of limbo. Daniel is sick, Ethan is trying to find himself, and Mark and we're just there, orbiting each other. Connected by years, by love, by damage. And I keep asking myself, who are we when the lies are gone? I still don't have an answer. A few months after the truth about the letters came out, everything hit a boiling point. Mark stopped coming around. Not just less frequent, completely. He stopped calling, texting, even seeing Ethan. I didn't know what changed until Ethan came home one night and threw his backpack on the floor, eyes red, fists clenched. He knew, he said. He knew everything, and he still let me grow up thinking he was my dad. I tried to calm him, but he snapped. You lied, he lied. Daniel disappeared. None of you ever told me the full truth until it was too late. He slammed his bedroom door so hard it cracked the frame. I just sat on the couch, stunned. My hands were shaking. I wanted to be angry at Mark, but how could I? We'd both done the same thing. We both failed our son. I called Mark. He didn't answer. I drove to his house. He wasn't there. Days passed. Weeks. And then, just as I was starting to believe he'd cut us off completely, the police showed up at my door. Ma'am, do you know a Mark Halpern? Yes, I said, panicked. He's my ex. We found him in his car. In a parking garage. He left this. The officer handed me a note. One single sentence, written in neat, shaky handwriting. I couldn't live with the lie anymore. He was gone. I collapsed. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. All I could think about was Ethan. He came home an hour later. I had to tell him. He didn't cry. He just stared at me. And said nothing. He walked into his room, locked the door, and didn't come out for 2 days. When he did, he was different. Colder. Distant. He barely spoke to me. He told his school counselor he wanted to move in with a relative, Mark's sister, in Minnesota. I didn't fight him. What could I say? I had destroyed everything. And then came the last blow. Daniel's health got worse. He was hospitalized in Madison. Ethan didn't want to see him. But I did. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe because I needed closure. I drove there alone, sat at his bedside while machines beeped around him. He was thinner, his face sunken, eyes tired. He looked at me and whispered, "You never told him why I stayed away after that first meeting." "What do you mean?" I asked. He closed his eyes for a long time. Then, slowly said, "Mark came to see me." My blood ran cold. He told me I'd ruin Ethan's life. That I didn't belong. He threatened to tell Ethan I was just trying to take money. Said he'd make sure Ethan hated me forever. I believed him. So I left. My hands clenched the edge of the chair. He never told me that. Daniel gave a sad smile. He wanted to protect Ethan. And you. In his own twisted way. I left the hospital in a daze. That night, I sat in the living room surrounded by silence. Mark was gone. Ethan was gone. Daniel would be gone soon. And I was alone. Completely. One night, weeks later, Ethan came back to visit. It was awkward. We sat across from each other like strangers. I told him everything. About Mark's threat. About Daniel's confession. About the letters. The affair. All of it. When I finished, Ethan just stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "You all took pieces of me. And none of you ever thought about what it would do." He stood up and walked toward the door. I called after him. I'm sorry, Ethan. I would give anything to take it back. He paused, then turned around. You don't get to take it back. You get to live with it. And then he left. That was the last time I saw him. Now, every day I wake up and see that empty house. I walk past the bedroom where I once tucked him in. I sit at the kitchen table where we once left. I open old photo albums and look at memories that don't feel like mine anymore. I write letters I never send. I apologize in 100 different ways, but the silence always answers. I lost my husband. I lost my son. I lost the truth a long time ago, and by the time I tried to find it, it had already turned into something too painful to fix. Some lies don't break you all at once. They chip away, slowly. And by the time you notice the cracks, it's already falling apart.